The Lean Startup by Ries. Chapter 7 Measure. Subtopic: An accountability framework that works across industries. Innovation accounting enables startups to prove objectively that they are learning how to grow a sustainable business. Innovation accounting begins by turning the leap of faith assumptions discussed in Chapter 5 into quantitative financial model. Every business plan has some kind of a model associated with it, even if it's written on the back of a napkin. That model provides assumptions about what the business will look like at a successful point in the future. For example, the business plan for an established manufacturing company would show it growing in proportion to its sales volumes. As the profit from the sales of goods are reinvested in marketing and promotions, the company gains new customers. The rate of growth depends primarily on three things: the profitability of each consumer, the cost of acquiring new customers, and the repeat purchase rate of existing customers. The higher these values are, the faster the company will grow and the more profitable it will be. These are the drivers of the company's growth model. By contrast, a marketplace company that matches buyers and sellers, such as eBay, will have a different growth model. Its success depends primarily on the network effects that make it the premier destination for both buyers and sellers to transact business. Sellers want the marketplace with the highest number of potential customers. Buyers want the marketplace with the most competition among sellers, which leads to the greatest availability of products and the lowest prices. In economics, this sometimes is called supply side increasing returns and demand side increasing returns. For this kind of startup, the important thing to measure is that the network effects are working, as evidenced by the high retention rate of new buyers and sellers. If people stick with the product with very little attrition, the marketplace will grow no matter how the company acquires new customers. The growth curve will look like a compounding interest table with the rate of growth depending on the interest rate of new customers coming to the product. Through these two businesses, sorry, though these two businesses have very different drivers of growth, we can still use a common framework to hold their leaders accountable. This framework supports accountability even when the model changes. How innovation accounting works. 3 learning milestones. Innovation accounting works in 3 steps. First, use a minimum viable product to establish real data on where the company is right now. Without a clear-eyed picture of your current status, no matter how far from the goal you may be, you cannot begin to track your progress. Second, startups must attempt to tune the engine from the baseline towards the ideal. This may take many attempts. After the startup has made all the micro changes and product optimizations, it can, it can to move its baseline towards ideal, the company reaches a decision point. That is the third step: pivot or persevere. If the company is making good progress towards the ideal, that means it's learning appropriately and using that learning effectively, in which case it makes sense to continue. If not, the management team eventually must conclude that its current product strategy is flawed and needs a serious change. When a company pivots, it starts the process all over again, re-establish a new baseline, and then tuning the engine from there. The sign of a successful pivot is that the engine tuning activities are more productive after the pivot than before. Establish the baseline. For example, a startup might create a complete prototype of its product and offer to sell to its real customers through its main marketing channel. This single MVP would test most of the startup's assumptions and establish baseline metrics for each assumption simultaneously. Alternatively, a startup might prefer to build separate MVP that are aimed at getting feedback on one assumption at a time. Before building the prototype, the company might perform a smoke test with its primary materials. This is an old direct marketing technique in which customers are given the opportunity to pre order a product that has not yet been built. A smoke test measures only one thing, whether customers are interested in trying a product by itself. This is insufficient to validate an entire growth model. Nonetheless, it can be very useful to get feedback on this assumption before committing more money and other resources to the product. These MVPs provide the first example of a learning milestone. An MVP allows a startup to fill a real baseline data in its growth model, conversion rates, sign up and trial rates, customer lifetime value, and so on. And this is valuable as a foundation for learning about customers and their reactions to a product, even if that foundation begins with extremely bad news. When one is choosing among the many assumptions in a business plan, it makes sense to test the riskiest assumption first. If you can't find a way to mitigate these risks towards the ideal that is required for a sustainable business, there is no point in testing the others. For example, a media business that is selling advertising has two basic assumptions that take the form of questions. Can it capture the attention of a defined customer segment on an ongoing basis? And can it sell the attention to advertisers? In a business in which the advertising rates for a particular customer segment are well known, the far riskier assumption is the ability to capture attention. Therefore, the first experiment should involve content production rather than advertising sales. Perhaps the company will produce a pilot episode or issue to see how customers engage. Tuning the engine. Once the baseline has been established, the startup can work towards a second learning milestone, turning the engine. Even product development, marketing, or other initiative that a startup undertakes should be targeted at improving one of the drivers of its growth model. For example, a company might spend time improving the design of its product to make it easier for new customers to use. This presupposes that the activation rate of new customers is a driver of growth and that its baseline is lower than the company would like. To demonstrate validated learning, the design changes must improve the activation rate of new customers. If they do not, the new design should be judged a failure. That is an important rule. A good design is one that changes customer behavior for the better. Compared to startups, the first company sets out with a clear baseline metrics, a hypothesis about what will improve that metric, and a set of experiments designed to test the hypothesis. The second team sits around debating what would improve the product, implements several of those changes at once, and celebrates if there is any positive increase in any of the numbers. Which startup is more likely to be doing effective work and achieving lasting results? Pivot or persevere. Over time, a team that is learning its way towards a sustainable business will see the number of in its models rise from the horrible baseline established by the MVP and converge to something like the ideal one established in the business plan. The startup that fails to do so will see that ideal recede even farther into the distance. When this is done right, even the most powerful reality distortion field won't be able to cover up this simple fact. If we are not moving the drivers of our business model, we are not making progress. That becomes a sure sign that it's time to pivot. Thank you for listening to the Lean Startup. I will continue to read tomorrow. If you want to buy the book, the link is in the description. Thank you.